Many people throughout the community have suggested, why doesn't anybody make a full video about optimizing an entire party? Look at the runtime of this video. That is why. However, I am not normal. This is not a normal thing to do. So, I hope that this will show you a lot of what is possible with team synergies. And as we get into this will be a full build guide for 3 of the 4 party members. The 4th party member, I already have a full build guide in a standalone video that is 40 minutes long by itself. Nothing that I state here is gospel and can't be modified at all. There are situations where you can choose to take one feat over another, but I think broad strokes, this is the strongest party you can make in Pathfinder 2e. And with that, I want to get into the disclaimers. Because this video will have no combat demos. If you are here to try and see actual gameplay of an optimized party, sorry, look at the runtime. Not happening. This was already really high effort to produce. There was a lot of research involved in doing this. This slideshow presentation that I decided to make for this is over 140 slides long, because that is what it means to do a video like this. If this gets 750 likes before I have to head back to college, I will find a way to live stream a combat demo so that you know I am not just fishing for good RNG, and I'm actually doing the thing, and it works consistently. Because if I was not confident in it working consistently, I'd record offline so I could do outtakes and stuff. But nope, fully live, and I'll find a way to make that work. This is a theory video. I have not actually done a lot of testing with this party in full, but it is not white room math. It is thinking through all the possible scenarios that a party could face, and then coming up with ways they could deal with all of them, basically. So now I want to quickly define what I mean by the strongest party, because it really comes down to a simple concept. We need to win high difficulty fights consistently. If we can do that, we're a pretty solid party. We also need to do the out-of-combat stuff, but that'll be acknowledged in each individual character's section and how they assist at the out-of-combat and the in-combat with each level, in detail for why you're making every decision, because that's what it means to make an optimization guide of this kind. You have about 8 fights per level in Pathfinder 2e, so that comes out to about 160 fights in your career, because 8 fights per level times 20 levels gives you 160 fights in a character's career. And if you do the math and you assume the average fight is a little bit harder than moderate and 70% of the XP comes from fights, the numbers kind of work out. This is just the running estimate. The actual number doesn't matter too much, but philosophy-wise, you have to do a lot of fights. Dying can be permanent, resurrections can be expensive if your GM even allows them, because not every table plays with resurrections. So winning with high consistency becomes key. It does not matter if you can high roll and beat stuff. We have to approach it from the same angle as like a Pokemon Nuzlocke, where anything that can die, we have to treat it like it will. Because in a game where you have permadeath as a mechanic, you don't have strong do-overs. And we also need to account for all the weird edge case monsters, because those exist and they might be one of the 160 fights. So we also can't sacrifice the consistency in the brute force just beat them down encounters, because those are most of your 160 fights, are simple encounters where you're fighting X amount of enemy creatures and you just need to win. And they don't really have a specific weird gimmick you need to deal with. And you can see my video of the strongest monsters if you want to see what I mean by the weird gimmicks. And so, requirements. This party should ideally have no hard lost matchups, so it should have a chance to win always. So if you don't have a specific damage type into a regenerating creature, that is an example of a hard lost matchup, and we are going to try and avoid that at all costs. And we should have an almost guaranteed win versus anything else. And it should also not be super daily resource intensive to win these fights, because if it's the strongest party, it should be able to win a lot of those fights in a single adventuring day. And it should win against the common AP style encounters, which, because this is the most frequent thing you see, is small rooms with a few enemies in them, and your party's just kind of in there with the enemies. And this is frequently what you see in the adventure paths, because they need to conserve page space on their books, because smaller maps fit on smaller page. So we also need to fill all of these roles, which I established in a previous video. But to just go down the list of what each one means, under the damage roles, because damage can be split up into many different ideas. You have burst damage, which is just a lot of damage done very quickly to try and remove enemies from the fight. You have the sustained damage, which is how you actually end boss fights. You have damage that is best against a single foe, multiple foes, the consistency that you can do that damage. So can you do a small amount of damage at consistency to actually finish off enemies? Or are you always doing single big hits that may be less consistent? Can you target different defenses with your offensive abilities? And do you have the damage type variety to not get walled by something with a regeneration? Those are all the damage roles a party needs to fill, roughly. You might be able to argue for extra things or for fewer things in this list, but this is the list I'm running with because I think it covers the common jobs that you want damage to do. Note, sustained DPR is not the only bullet point here. We are not just going to be calculating out one number and saying, strongest. That's not how it works here. We're going to be thinking through it a lot harder. And then the non-damage rolls. We have a lot of healing stuff. The burst healing. If somebody suddenly gets crit by a boss, do we have the ability to recover from that? Do we have the ability to heal between combats? Because in order for us to be average difficulty and actually hitting those assumed difficulties and doing well, we're assumed to be near full health between every encounter. How do we get there? Do we have small amounts of healing we can use to stabilize somebody if a fight is going well? Or do we need to burn big resources and do a burst heal always? This is another thing that mostly matters for resource conservation throughout a day, but it's something to note. Do we have action economy manipulation? Can we force bosses to play with only 2 of their 3 actions? Can we force mooks to all be slowed? Can we, etc, etc, etc. And then buffs and debuffs, which are of course split into the circumstance, status, buff, debuff, etc. Can we deal with buff states? Do we have anything to deal with that part of the game? And can our party actually absorb some damage so that we don't get wiped after we get hit by a single boss crit? And then out of combat, we're going to need a variety of spells to deal with scenarios out of combat. Prepared casters tend to be a little bit better at getting the niche utility spells, so that's going to be something that's weighted more that way. Spontaneous are better at filling up the stuff up here, I'd say. And we should also have strong skill variety. That's our list of requirements. You can see it's already getting very tight to try and make something that I would call fully optimal. But you will see how, because I think I did it. And I did it through the concept of inevitability. Who wins if a fight goes really, really long? And so, our goal is to win every fight. We will do this by achieving inevitability, as in making it so that if this fight goes for a large quantity of turns, we will win. Just because there are so many dice, every die, like standard deviations, the more dice you roll, the closer everything is to the mean on like the big grand scale, like bunch of statistics there, but basically, the longer you measure something, the more likely you are to see a value that's closer to the average. And if we can make it so on average dice luck, we win and we can stall until we get like a long string of average dice luck, we should be winning every fight. And that's the core idea. Against a bunch of small creatures, this naturally happens. And it's part of the reason everybody assumes that small creature encounters with a bunch of mooks and minions are easier in Pathfinder 2. Because they have less damage threat as people start dropping out of the horde of small creatures. So that means in a high damage party that just cares about damage out, healing in, that kind of stuff, fights will get easier the longer they go if you're fighting a bunch of smaller minions. And that's just how it goes. Inevitability is in party's favor automatically against a lot of smaller creatures. Bosses naturally have that inevitability against the party, because now the equation is inverted. The party gets weaker as people fall, where the boss is still fully damaging, fully being a threat. And the goal is to weaken the boss so you always have inevitability. Because we will naturally have inevitability against the small creatures, we just need to get inevitability against bosses. And I do not think that the Bard and 3 fighters can achieve this kind of inevitability against bosses. Because that boss can still get a lucky crit. Send the Bard into spending a bunch of actions, spend that fighter into actions getting back up. People are doing less damage. The boss gets another maybe slightly lucky crit. Maybe not, because, you know, they're critting on like a 14. So the 3 fighters and a Bard can get just beat down by a boss who is rolling well. And that is going to be the reason I don't say that party is a strong party. Along with their out of combat utility is trash. Along with they have no way to deal with ranged enemies. There are a bunch of edge case monsters that stop them because they don't have the elemental damage focus, etc, etc, etc. 3 fighters and a Bard is a good meme, not a good party. And of course, after you have inevitability, you can just stall, and you will win. Because you have inevitability. Stalling means you win with inevitability. So, now for the party makeup. And this is just going to be a basic introduction to every member of the party, so that way when I discuss builds in more detail in the next section, you can then know exactly where all the combos fit together, and you can start to see the pieces being assembled. Because this is going to be the important stuff to note. So, to start with, I began building my party around the most powerful Pathfinder 2e character. I made a previous video on this. And why did I use that here? Because you need to start building a party with something as your starting point, and everyone else seemed to start from the polearm fighter and build a high damage comp. I decided to start from something that powers the strongest stall engine, because we are planning to do a slower build. Take a lot of turns to do things, because the amount of turns it takes you to win a fight is irrelevant. It's just a matter of you winning it and spending fewer resources to do so. And we have seen the fast strat parties. We've seen 3 fighters and a Bard. And I'm not impressed. I'm just simply not impressed. So we haven't really seen anybody try and build a slow strat. And this is a debuffer healer off tank, which makes the core of a slow comp. The goal is to stall. Oh, and it covers all these roles by itself. Orange means it's half covered. Green means that it's like fully covered for like an entire party. It has a harder time doing the DPR stuff because War Priest naturally doesn't have the best damage output unless you're heavily investing into it, having two-handed weapon, etc, etc, etc. We are not really doing that. But we can have multi-target burst because Divine actually has some pretty good area damage spells in it. You can see the end of the video where I go over our strategy against mooks if you want to see some of my favorites there, because yeah, its single target damage is nothing to write home about, but it still does punch. It will do some amount of damage. If you want to see a full breakdown of this build, go watch that other video. I'm not going to be repeating it all here, because this video, already plenty long, doesn't need more help. It doesn't have the best damage type variety because it does not have the elementals, but it can target the will, fort, reflex, and AC all very well, so we're good there. In terms of non-damage rolls, yep, has Cleric extra heal slots, yep, has all the medicine stuff, yep, can battle medicine for stabilization or do the medicine skills to do that kind of stuff. It can manipulate action economy via trips, grapples, stuff. It can also get haste because of Rory. And it can provide good buffs and debuffs, particularly status bonuses and circumstance penalty because of the trip and the grapple. It also is okay at soaking hits because it does have a shield. It can self-heal. but if it wants to stand toe-to-toe with a boss, it will need something else to help it get that damage mitigation. So, it needs that further damage mitigation to fully stand up to those threats, which means we need to siphon the damage away from the Cleric, so we want something to help control the enemy activities. So obviously we want to use Guardian, right? No. Guardian just simply isn't good enough to make its way here, so we're using Champion. A lot of the Champion feats share overlap with the Cleric ones, mostly to get Athletic Rush. And that's it, but, get to Athletic Rush, and that's +2 status bonus to Athletics check, so it can do the grapple trip stuff really, really well along with the Cleric. Be another source of that kind of debuff. Its reaction helps protect, and it does its job. Plans to run at the boss, trip them, hold them down. You have a couple characters doing this, both with shields. So you have a front line that can get lock down your bosses. Fist Strike is still a D6 agile weapon for Irori. So you have a good weapon, good strike against the mooks. You can also imply Enfeebled 2 from the Glimpse of Redemption, which you can read this here. It's usually very, very bad to do 0 damage with an attack. Especially if you're planning to take this fight long, because that's 0 damage on their first attack every single turn. That's their first attack that hits. So most enemies will choose to become Enfeebled 2. So they're going to get a -2 accuracy penalty if they're using strength to attack, which is the common thing enemies do. So Glimpse of Redemption, very strong. And for the Champion build, you really aren't going to have burst damage. Your sustained damage will actually be pretty decent because you're still a martial class at the end of the day, but it's not like great. Your single target damage, again, it's not great. Multi-target is only burnt orange instead of red because you are going to be splashing into some magic later on with this build. That's also you get the damage types here. Damage consistency because, you're still a martial, you have some cantrips, you can do stuff. Grapplers naturally are very good at targeting different defenses, so that's perfectly fine here. You can't really burst heal people with just lay on hands, but it's great for stabilizing, healing between combats, etc. You're a grappler, so you're good at action economy manipulation. You're going to be applying the circumstance penalties as well, because you're good at debuffing. You can apply a status bonus to AC by slapping the lay on hands on somebody that's struggling. And champions are known for their ability to soak hits really, really well. Because with the champion reaction, you're either attacking to them, whose highest AC in the game basically, has a shield raised, and will then shield block it to make you deal basically nothing, or will champion reaction you hitting an ally who probably also has a shield and is shield blocking to make you do basically nothing. So the goal is to make you do basically nothing. It's a solid game plan. It works. You also are going to get status penalties from this build if you choose to demoralize, and it will cover a lot of the charisma skills out of combat, but we are doubling up on athletics because we do have now 2 grapplers in the party. So that is a point against it in terms of skill variety, but I think you can cover the useful skills in the game while having 2 characters in athletics. So, how do we actually do damage as this party though? Because currently, all I've displayed is a stall engine. And while that stall engine looks pretty good and could definitely make a fight take a long time, how do we actually end a fight? And because that's an important question to ask. We don't have inevitability unless the fight can inevitably end. Otherwise, we just pull out bedrolls and take nap time in our GM's house. Enemies get prone a lot, which is reactive strike fuel. And we know fights will last a long time, so averages matter more than the average party would care about them, which is a funny sentence, but it's true. We care about the average DPR more than an average comp would. So we're picking fighter. I don't think I need to argue this anymore. We're picking fighter. And we're going to get a polearm fighter. Because polearm fighter is just consistently good, threatens reactive strikes. That's what we're doing. Our polearm fighter will have a little bit more spice to it than the average, but it's a polearm fighter. You kind of seen them before. We are splashing Magus, So we have ranged options and we get burst damage potential, because that way we can burst damage into weaker enemies to get them out of initiative order, so that we can then have the inevitability faster and just continue pushing through. Because that's the fighter's job, to assert inevitability by actually dealing the damage. So, fighter. We're going to be having heavy burst damage, heavy sustained DPR, great single target damage. The multi-target only really comes from stuff like Electric Arc, so it's not going to be the best. But your single target is so high, we can basically close our eyes and pretend it's multi-target if you just hit several times. Because, yeah, I mean, if an enemy dies quickly, single target is effectively multi-target. The consistency of damage is pretty decent because you are at fighter accuracy. You just aren't really going to have the same thing as, like, I have access to the barrage things that are going to be dealing damage guaranteed, or the saving throw cantrips that always deal some damage on a normal success, and like stuff like that. That's not really what we're going for the most, but you still have it. So your consistency is actually pretty high. You can't really target different defenses easily. You do have the cantrips, but most of the time you are just going to be basic striking. And you will have pretty good damage type variety from those cantrips. Now, why people tend to not like fighters is in the non-damage category over here, because you can see no healing, no real buffing. You can soak hits, I guess, but fighters are not famous for their non-damaging techniques, and that's fine because every other build in this party has this maxed to the 9s. This is our one character that's covering the damage side of what we need to do, because we will need something to do damage eventually. And out of combat, we are going to be expecting it to be trained in a bunch of the int skills, and we are going to have it be doing a lot of our recall knowledging in combat, and it will have some spells later on, but few of them are actually going to be used for utility purposes. So then the question becomes, what is the fourth member of this party? And we need some kind of caster to help the Cleric, because just one caster won't be enough to carry every utility spell we would need for some adventuring days, because we don't just look at the average, we look at an intense adventuring day, and we'd probably want another caster to burst heal in case something goes wrong. And we want a dexterity-based character to cover the dexterity skills because, well, nothing is covering those yet. And so Wizard, Witch, Psychic, Bard are all the obvious choices for that type of character. You could probably throw Sorcerer and other things in there as well, so a lot of different choices for something that can definitely fill this niche pretty well. And we're going to go with Witch of Resentment. And we're going to splash a bit of Psychic for burst damage, so we can help get those minions out of initiative order quickly. Because that's going to be a big deal for us. In those fights against a lot of creatures, killing them quickly will let us, of course, get inevitability faster, so we can then stall and win that fight. And this is why burst is useful in the slow comp. Trust me, for now, it will make sense when I talk about tactics at the end, but that's the rough idea for now. And so, the Resentment Witch, you can read it up above. It is Occult spell list, Occultism trained, which is fine. Enfeeble is a spell we will never prepare in our life because we are playing with the champion, and the champion will automatically do this enfeebling. Evil Eye will just be pretty much a nice thing putting up on screen now that will just make it so that enemies have -1 status to do a lot of things. It's mostly just there so that we have something that we can always do in order to get familiar of ongoing misery to get ticking. So it's not really super useful for us. But what is super useful is Familiar of Ongoing Misery. What this one says is that when we cast or sustain a hex, the familiar gets to curse somebody within 15 feet of it, and that prolongs the duration of any negative conditions affecting it by 1 round. And good thing there's no other conditions that last for a time duration in this party, right? You'll see. So this build will do a lot of good stuff for us. Its damage is nothing to write home about, but with the Psychic Dip, you can burst. That'll be single 2-target damage. You get some area spells. The sustained DPR isn't good, but that's not the job of this build in a long boss fight. It's to just make sure no debuff falls off ever. And that's like their whole reason to be there. But in the fights against a lot of smaller creatures, your goal is to then provide another healing source, be one to burst out a couple minions, and then just get ready to be a stall engine. So really good in the non-damage sections because we have healing. We'll have ways to do minor healing to stabilize people mid-fight. That's an encounter-based resource. And we'll be able to provide a good amount of buffs and debuffs from a lot of different angles. And so, out of combat, again, going to be really useful with the dexterity skills, and it'll be another spellcaster to help alleviate some issues from the Cleric. So, overall, we're doing very well for ourselves. We will have pretty good burst damage, pretty good sustained damage. Our only major weaknesses really are going to be multi-target fights where a lot of enemies have specific special abilities we need to worry about, because we don't have big area damage blasts that some parties would have access to. And our damage type variety could be lacking because we need to sacrifice like damage per round to get the damage type variety, because we're relying on marshals with caster archetypes to do this. But other than that, we're good to go, and everything is covered by just these 4 members. And then it comes as a matter of synergy to make it better than just a normal average party. And the first individual build is the Cleric. And for this, I recommend just watching my other video because that's a full build guide on how exactly this character works. And I'm just going to have a little note here about how it functions in the party. This is your main game plan. You athletic rush in, you trip, or you grab, and then after the setup is all done and they're held down by the champion, you basically just turn into an armored caster, be wherever, help support in the armored caster way. Against a bunch of minions, you throw out a big area damage spell, and then you're an armored caster after that, and you just kind of do your thing. You basically just change whatever you're doing to match what the group needs at that exact moment. And versatility is actually power. You swap what you do depending on what encounter you're faced with. And having the perfect tool for any given scenario is really powerful. And as a cleric, you have a bunch of extra slots for heal. So the healing job is covered. The rest of your slots can be to fill all the other little niches that you want a caster to fill. So that makes this one the most versatile, and thus, because you can do all of the weird niche utility spells, and when those scenarios come up, you have the answer, you then become extremely powerful from the versatility. This is probably the most versatile character build in the game, and can flex into whatever role the party needs in that moment. Whether that's on an encounter-by-encounter basis or on a turn-by-turn basis. You can do just about whatever is needed really well. And if that thing happens to be healing, tripping, grappling, you are basically best in slot at that thing while being able to do everything else. And on a day-to-day basis, you're prepared caster. Prepare whatever you need for the next arc. You're getting on a boat? Oh, look, guess who has 3 copies of Water Walking? That's just how you do things as this type of cleric. And in this party, your goal is to just maximize that versatility angle. The next character is the champion, which is going to be all about absorbing damage, spreading status, all that kind of thing. They are also an off healer due to abilities like Lay on Hands, so let's just get right into it. So for level 1, this is going to be a doozy. We are going to be a human, a Varn, aka a half-elf, because we're going to want some of those elven feats later on. And then we're going to get Natural Ambition, Deity Domain, Might Domain to get Athletic Rush. That is the chain of things that give Athletic Rush at level 1 in addition to Weight of Guilt. And then for background, it's personal choice. I went with Martial Disciple Athletics in my example build, but it's really personal choice. Anything that gives a skill or skill feat that you care about, and lets you boost strength or charisma, either one, is completely fine. And then for class, champion as a redeemer of Irori, and then we get Glimpse of Redemption and Fist Strikes as like the main class features. Glimpse is the champion reaction for the redeemers, and Fist Strike is a D6 because champion has Deadly Simplicity baked into its kit. And by the way, Irori could not have neutral good followers, so remaster loosening up the alignment requirements actually is really beneficial because this means you can have redeemers of Irori, which was previously a big thing stopping this build. And now for the class feat, we're of course going to go with Weight of Guilt. So let's go into the stat array. We're just going to be maxing out strength and charisma, putting the leftover scraps into Constitution and Wisdom because they are saving throws, HP, that kind of thing. Strength is needed for our attacks. Charisma will be used for our spellcasting. We don't need Dex or Int because we have other characters covering Int. And we are going to be in heavy armor. So, easy enough. A lot of people look at the stat spread and say, that's very greedy. And yeah, it is. And that's because charisma being this high that early means that you're putting Constitution a bit lower, which is normally very dangerous. But this is a party where you are with 2 other healers, one of which is also an off-tank. And we are planning to use a shield to give us a nice HP buffer anyway. So, this is pretty fair. Then in terms of skill choice, I just kind of picked good skills, made sure to have Diplomacy and Intimidation. And I also made sure to train Acrobatics that you do not get walled by, oh no, we are on ice. Because if your tank cannot move because there is ice on the ground, that's a major weakness. We're trying to avoid all major weaknesses possible, so we're making sure to train Acrobatics here. Athletics is the big skill that we are going to be maxing out first. After that, we should be maxing out Diplomacy, because Diplomacy comes up a lot out of combat, and Demoralize isn't even like that good for this party, because we already have Champion Reaction applying status penalty debuffs, and we have the Witch who will use Evil Eye to apply status penalty debuffs. So Demoralize doesn't actually do a lot, and Frightened will not actually get extended by Resentment Witch. So Demoralize just doesn't do a whole lot, but it's still good enough for if there's like blah blah. It's a nice option to have, but it's not something we need to put a bunch of effort into maximizing. And so here is what the choices for level 1 looks like in a visual way. And I just quickly want to go over the champion reaction in more detail now, because it is important for the entire rest of this build. So Glimpse of Redemption has a trigger of an enemy damages your ally and both are within 15 feet of you. So you need to be there in the front line with your ally fighting an enemy also in the front line. Pretty stringent requirement. But it then gives the opponent a choice when they hit your ally, which again, giving opponent choice, usually bad unless it's clearly very bad choice for them, and this is. They can choose to make it so the attack doesn't happen, just take no damage, which is going to basically put them at slowed 1 and always attack for multi-attack penalty if they're provoking this every single round, which obviously you can't have. Or they can let your ally get a really fat amount of resistance, 2+ level, and then they become enfeebled until the end of its next turn. With Weight of Guilt, we can also make that Stupefied 2 instead. And so if you're fighting a spellcaster or some enemy that doesn't care about its strength, you can then lower its will save, and all of its abilities that rely on speech, such as, well, spells. Stupefied has a specific thing about spellcasting that makes it have a flat chance to fail. So this will nullify a lot of casting on top of it already being on a grappler, which has a very positive matchup into enemy casters. So enemy spellcasters are not having a good time into you. And also, this penalty that is a status condition lasts until the end of its next turn. which means Familiar of Ongoing Misery can extend the debuffs from champion reaction. And by the way, in terms of the rule of condition, I am interpreting it to mean the basic conditions, because I think that if you let the Resentment Witch extend any negative spell effect, it can balloon out of control really, really fast. So I'm going to interpret the word condition to mean basic condition. Enfeebled and Stupefied are basic conditions. This Glimpse of Redemption Weight of Guilt thing applies a status debuff, a condition, for a timed duration, which means the Resentment Witch will be able to extend it for the entire fight. And this is no save. So just for the fight going on more than a round, the boss will have basically a -2 to hit for the entire combat. And if they're knocked prone, they're now attacking from -4, which is not exactly a playable position for them. Enforcing the boss to have to attack from multi-attack penalty from attack 1 is great, because either they are throwing away their first attack, thus having to attack from a multi-attack penalty effectively, or they're becoming enfeebled and you're kind of knocking them prone doing other stuff, so that they're having a major penalty anyway and also having damage reduced. That's the goal of this party. This is our stall engine, really. And also, here are our focus spells. Lay on Hands, we're mostly using it for the healing, but if you use it to heal an ally, they also gain a +2 status bonus to AC for 1 round, which is a nice little bonus, because if the Cleric gets low, you can then Lay on Hands to their back, and suddenly now they're on the AC level of the fighter, they're raising shield, oh look, they're at your AC level, how are they getting hit? And then also, against Undead, we'll let it do some damage of Vitality, and then give them a penalty to AC for 1 round. This is an example of a spell effect that could be considered a condition under a very generous reading of the rule, but I'm not considering this type of effect. Because while this is a negative condition, it is not a negative basic condition, so it's unclear if this is intended to work. This is because I'm trying to do strict readings of the rules to make sure that my builds will be accepted in Pathfinder society. I couldn't find an exact ruling on this. It might be out there, but I do think Resentment Witch and what makes a condition does need to be better defined somewhere eventually. And then Athletic Rush, 1 action cast time, lets you stride while doing it, gives a bonus to speed while doing it, and then a bonus to athletics checks for that 1 round duration, meaning it's that +2 to grapple, trip, etc., because it does not have any limits for where that applies and blah blah blah. Athletic Rush is just really good. This bonus athletics checks also lasts until the start of your next turn, so it affects your escape DC to grapple as well. Very strong. So we were playing human explicitly to get Athletic Rush as early as possible, while still having Weight of Guilt to punish spellcasters as early as possible. Now in level 2, we are going to be going for Wrestler. Those of you that have been following my channel for a while will know Wrestler dedication has a tendency to show up in my guides. This is where it shows up. It took me a while, but we're here now. And Wrestler dedication, all of the lines of text here are actually useful for us, so let's start. You become an expert in athletics and gain Titan Wrestler, so we get an extra skill feat and we get an extra skill training, just like, okay, already pretty good. We can make lethal attacks with our unarmed strike, so now our fist can be non-lethal or lethal, our choice at any time. So we can now use our fist strike against constructs without needing to take a penalty for using a non-lethal weapon. And then we can also get a bonus to Fortitude DC when resisting attempts to grapple or swallow whole. And grapple is now an action that monsters will be doing more and more because the grab monster ability now requires them to roll a grapple check with athletics. So now we have a bonus to resist that, which is really good. And for our level 2 skill feat, we are going to pick Assurance. Grab Assurance Athletics because once you are at a high multi-attack penalty, you can still try an Assurance Trip, Assurance Grapple, whatever. And it's just generally pretty strong to do that. If you're against a lot of weaker enemies, you can fish to see if assurance will get you a grapple or will get you a trip. And if it does work, those enemies are just not playing the game anymore, because now you're going punch, punch. Oh, I know I have a grapple on you. And it just opens up that option against those lower level enemies, which makes it very strong. Then for level 3, I'm suggesting that you put diplomacy up to expert because athletics is already expert due to wrestler. And then for divine ally, I'm recommending shield because we are going to be taking a lot of stuff to make shield block better as the game goes on. We are also going to be taking fleet because move speed is good. It helps you get in position. And that's kind of all I have to say on fleet. It's just really strong. And I am using the automatic bonus progression for the example builds, simply so that I don't need to buy items for the whole level 10 party, and all the numbers make sense and are basically where they're supposed to be if you flip through the different levels in Pathbuilder. So that's why I made the decision, but your first skill boosting item, try to boost athletics still. And the ABP will also display which skills I think are the most viable to get an item for, potentially, so don't worry about too much. At level 4, we are going to be getting my favorite feat in the whole game, Combat Grab. A fighter feat that we will not be taking on the fighter, but we are taking on 2 non-fighter characters. That is the Swing Ripper guarantee. We will take fighter feats on everything except fighters. And then I'm also taking Combat Climber, because it just lets us climb while holding a shield, which can be useful in some scenarios. But really, from this point on with the champion, every skill feat is just kind of pick your favorite. I'm going to give suggestions, but don't take them too seriously. So, what Combat Grab does is it says, as long as you have an active multi-attack penalty, you can use this activity. And we are going to have a hand free, basically at all times, because we have the shield, and, oh look, an open hand. Fist strikes can be made with stuff like kicks and headbutts, as per the fist weapon description, blah blah blah. Not getting into that, just know, you can headbutt in this game, so you can keep an open offhand to meet the requirements of Combat Grab. So you make a melee strike while keeping the hand free, we can do that. If the strike hits, you grab the target using your free hand. The creature remains grabbed until the end of your next turn, or until it escapes, whichever comes first. So this lets you get a strike and a grapple off as basically a single action at your normal martial accuracy. So you can go athletic rush in, trip them, and then go for the combat grab, which will target their AC and they're already off guard because they're prone from the trip, and like all that kind of stuff. They then need to escape against your athletics DC, which is still boosted by athletic rush. Very strong. But there's something else I want to point out with combat grab. It says end of your next turn in it. Resentment Witch can extend combat grab, because it is now a condition with a timed duration until the end of your next turn, until the end of your next turn. That is literally how it defines timed duration. It extends combat grab. In addition, it extends grapple. Both the restrained and the grabbed parts of grapple can get extended by Resentment Witch. So if you get a grapple once, the opponent will need to try and escape it, then will need to try and stand, and then you immediately put them back on the ground because you have 2 grapplers waiting to do that, and they just spent all their resources trying to stand. That is our stall engine. And again, if they're trying to attack from the ground, they're doing it at a big minus accuracy because you're giving them a status penalty to attack, a circumstance penalty to attack from being prone, and then they're just swinging from the ground because they can't spend resources to get out of the grapple, and whoever they hit is probably just going to shield block them, champion reaction them, and take very little damage. Whatever damage they do take can get lay on hands away, healed by the witch, healed by the cleric, and it won't matter. That is how we stall against bosses. This is the core of our stall engine. Yeah, familiar of ongoing misery, of course. So at level 5, we're just going to increase intimidation because that's like the 3rd skill I pointed out that we want to increase. That's what our stat array will look like, and we are going to be taking otherworldly magic here, which will give us our ranged attack on this character. This is the latest any of our characters will be developing ranged attack, because we had to wait till level 5 here. I think that early game you can get away with not having a ranged attack because flying enemies are not common at the low levels, but you really should look into some kind of ranged attack by level 5. Otherwise, I will heavily dock that against a build, because that means as soon as an enemy flies, you lose the ability to play the game. And due to remaster, the spellcasting proficiency is not split by tradition, and all the innate spells are charisma based. That is why we maximize charisma so hard at level 1, so that we can pick up an otherworldly magic damage cantrip and have it scale off our champion spellcasting proficiency, which does increase automatically at an even faster rate than the War Priest at some points. So I'd recommend grabbing Electric Arc or Frostbite here, those being two of the best primal damage cantrips. Or primal/arcane damage cantrips. Here are the spells. Electric Arc will be higher damage because it can hit more targets, but has a range of 30 feet and fewer things have a weakness to electricity. New Forest Troll has a weakness to electricity, but Frostbite is also just like really good because a lot of fire enemies exist in this game, and a lot of those fire enemies are weak to cold. So unless you fight a lot of constructs that happen to be weak to lightning or electricity, I would say maybe go away from the Electric Arc, even though its damage seems better on the tin, because Frostbite has that longer range, which is a big factor for us, and can hit creatures that have a more common weakness. Because in a normal, let's just try and output damage scenario, you're just going to be punching. So this is like the big choice of which spell do I want? And the fighter will have the other option. So it's not going to be a big loss one way or the other. My personal preference is on Frostbite, but it's close. Now, at level 6, we will be picking up Shield Warden and Lead Climber. And Shield Warden just simply lets us shield block for our allies instead of just ourselves. Which doesn't make sense because then it competes with Champion Reaction. Yeah, we can get magical shields that'll block slightly more than Champion Reaction, especially with our Shield Spirit, but doesn't do a lot right now. But wait until level 8, I swear it will make sense eventually. This is not just a bait feat that we're throwing away at level 6. At level 7, we are going to be going ahead and picking up Toughness, bringing Athletics up to Master. Toughness is just simply more HP. More HP, very good. And level 7 is also a big level for Champion. This is when you get Expert in Armor, which means you are now running around at a +2 AC than you were previously. So Champion is now the extreme AC part of the creature building table, and it will not leave that extreme area of the creature building table like ever. So this is where Champion really becomes an unbreakable wall, just due to that armor expertise right there. A class feature that is decently easy to overlook if you're not familiar with the game. So at level 8, we'll be taking Quick Shield Block and Quick Climb. So what Quick Shield Block does is it gives us an extra reaction. So now we have 2 total reactions on the Champion, one of which can only be Shield Block though. And you can only choose to react to one trigger once. So if an ally takes damage, you're gonna need to pick whether you are doing your champion reaction or shield blocking. You can't do both on the same triggering activity, basically. The ruling is that you cannot do 2 reactions that share the same trigger condition. Technically, the trigger conditions are worded a little bit differently, but in most cases, GMs are going to say, no, these both are clearly very similar reactions, triggering off the same attack. You do one of them. So that's the ruling I'm expecting. But hey, this lets us champion reaction to get damage reduction on the first attack, shield block their second attack. And with the quick shield block, you can also shield block for yourself, shield block for an ally, and just really keep the pressure up with the shield blocks. It's just more damage mitigation. And that does compete with the Wrestler Whirling Throw. Whirling Throw is a very, very strong ability. I'm gonna shrink my camera down so you can read all of it. And the thing that makes Whirling Throw so strong is it's not an attack trait ability. So you can do all this after grappling somebody. You beat them up after grappling them. On your next turn, they haven't escaped. You beat them up some more, and then you Whirling Throw them away. And that's normally how you do it, because you would release them at the end of that turn anyway. So giving up your grapple isn't that big of a downside. But for this party, there's a minor issue with that line of thought. The grapples never get released. Because of Resentment Witch, those grapples are indefinite duration most of the time. So you're never really going to have the opportunity to go for something like Whirling Throw, to go for something like Suplex and release the grapple yourself. So I evaluate those feats a little bit lower than I normally would, just given how the party comp functions. Whirling Throw may still end up being better in practice and testing. I haven't done a whole lot of that, but just because it can be damage against a lot of smaller enemies to increase your overall threat level to them when you're going for your hit them, combat grab, then do a Whirling Throw stuff when you're dealing with a bunch of mooks. But I'm not that scared of the groups of minion encounters, just because we already have some casters that are fine with doing area damage and blah, 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 blah. So because I'm not that scared of them, I'm not going to invest heavily into beating them. So moving along, at level 9, I recommend increasing Diplomacy. Then I'm going to say grab Multi-Talented, which will give you a couple skill trainings, Deception Nature, and I'm choosing Elemental Bloodline because I think that you really want the Primal list, just for the cantrips being really strong. And I picked Elemental just because that was the Primal Bloodline that I personally thought was interesting. You can really do whatever here. Just pick an Arcane or Primal Sorcerer of choice. Phoenix could work very well here. It's just that Phoenix was uncommon and also has a minor PFS restriction on it. So I just kind of wanted to make it as PFS friendly as I could within reason without sacrificing too much of the core identity of this character. And so this is where you should be looking at getting bonuses to athletics and that kind of thing. But yeah, you can go ahead and you can pick up the other damage cantrips that you didn't get. At level 10, I think that you kind of just leave Charisma at +4 for the rest of your adventuring career and go for a little bit more int to get a couple more trained skills. And here you get Shield of Reckoning. And Shield of Reckoning is a very, very powerful feat, because it lets you, as a single reaction, Champion's Reaction, and Shield Block the same target at the same time. Just whoop, boom. Sounds really, really strong. So you raise shield as champion, and enemies are obviously not going to want to attack your champion, who is higher armor class than the rest of the party, plus a raised shield. So they're probably going to attack into the Cleric that's next to you with also raised shield, or maybe the Fighter, because they're the same AC, effectively. And then you get to champion reaction them, and then shield block some of that extra damage that's coming after. And it does have the Flourish trait, so even after you have the ability to make several champions reactions at a time, Shield of Reckoning is still only once per round. And by the way, this is the pre-remaster Flourish trait that says you can only use one action with the Flourish trait per turn. Now it is per round to make it work with this type of reaction. So do note, you can't Shield of Reckoning more than once in a round, but we can Shield of Reckoning and then go for our extra reaction shield block after that anyway. So we're going to be shield blocking a lot. So with this build, you want to evaluate, get a shield with as much hardness as you can afford. And I'd also recommend getting a shield augment, which is an item from Grand Bazaar, and just lets the shield be grapple, or not grapple, but trip, disarm, etc. A lot of the athletics maneuvers are there as traits. Pick up a couple of those, good to go. Because you're not really going to want to use a shield boss or shield spike. It's just not really a thing you want to do. But does the resistance or the hardness apply first? Now, it would be beneficial for you if you were able to apply your champion's reaction resistance before the shield block actually went through. But I was wrong in a previous video where I said that's how the interaction works, because there is no official ruling. All the damage step is weird. The official ruling from the designers is whatever their flavor text makes sense. So I personally think that the flavor of I make the enemy attack weaker with my glimpse of redemption should have the resistance apply before the shield block does its thing, so that the shield will take less damage. But that is up for an argument with your GM. I am now staying out of it. The shield is going to be a pretty important part of your kit because that is how you're doing a lot of your damage mitigation. And again, your goal as the champion is just damage mitigation, output some damage against these smaller enemies. Against bosses, make so they cannot play the game. Resentment Witch extends the duration they cannot play the game to be the entire combat. So now we are on to the main damage dealer of the group, the fighter. And this is actually the one where I'm going to suggest the most alternative feats, just because there's a lot of support for the two-handed weapon reach fighter, just in general. And none of those options are particularly wrong. I think I picked the one that is the best, because I would pick the one that I think is the best. You can think others are better, and that's completely fine. You're allowed to have opinions. So first, let's go over our ABCs. For Ancestry, we're going to go with Ancient Elf, who will give us Magus as a dedication. We're also going to pick the Nimble Elf feat. And for the Magus' spells, I say take Shield and then Electric Arc or Frostbite. This is going to be your primary range attack, but we are also going to be really fast, so having a super long range is not as relevant. We're going to get more cantrips eventually, so whatever you want to pick will work here. And Shield cantrip, by the way, is because elves have a low amount of level 1 starting HP, so Shield cantrip will let us augment and protect against that. And also, it kind of fits the theme to have every single character in the party be able to shield block somehow, because I think that's really funny. And for background, personal choice, I took Junk Collector because I like Crafter's Appraisal as a feat, just to be able to identify magic items easier. Because the fighter primarily out of combat will be repairing people's shields, and also be identifying magic items. That's mostly what you're doing during exploration, when the casters are doing a lot of the refocusing or treating wounds, etc. Anything that gives a useful skill or skill feat, boost strength or int, etc, etc. A lot of backgrounds can be good here. And then for class, we're picking Fighter. And for the class feat from Fighter, we're going to be picking Sudden Charge. And here is stat array stuff, you can take a screenshot. I just took a lot of the int skills and the other recall knowledge skills in religion, nature. Acrobatics is also going to hang out at trained for the same reason of I really have trauma from being on ice floor for one single fight. We will also be using a halberd, just because I think a lot of the other polearms are pretty interchangeable. Party members will be doing the debuffing, so we don't need something with a trip trait or a grapple trait or whatever. We don't need something to disarm, it's just whatever. We only care about dealing big damage, particularly on our reactive strike, that we will be constantly threatening to make so that people never want to stand up from prone. And we will want reach to threaten more space with that reactive strike, stop people from approaching us freely, that kind of thing, stop them from running away freely, just basically make it so enemies have fewer choices, except to sit still and fight for us in melee, where we can layer debuff after debuff after debuff after debuff, because that's our goal. And the big damage against minions means that we can start thinning out the crowd, gain inevitability. Easy enough. Many of the D10 reach polearms are interchangeable for this build. I picked halberd because I like the thematic of a halberd. That's it. You can pick other weapons, it's not a big deal. We don't care about the maneuver traits. Why not use a bludgeoning weapon and get the crushing rune? And so crushing does what you can read on screen. It applies clumsy or enfeebled for a duration, and enfeebled for a duration. And this duration can be extended by Resentment Witch. But the thing is, we already can imply an enfeebled for a duration because we have a champion. we're already applying a penalty to reflex saves, like what Clumsy would do, because Resentment Witch will have a Hex cantrip that can make an enemy sickened that they can't reduce as long as that spell is being sustained. So, therefore, I don't think we need to have another source of status penalties. And so really, the only version of Crushing that will actually do much in this party is the Greater Crushing, because it'll increase the Clumsy value by 1. But at 9th level, that's when some very nasty spells that apply Clumsy come out to play. And those of you that know Pathfinder 2 and what spells in it are really, really good at 5th rank know exactly what I'm talking about. For the rest of you, you will need to wait till the Witch section at the very end where I drop some crap. So, I'm not a fan of Crushing for this party comp. If you were to drop the champion and want to run this party, Crushing becomes then a way that you'd try and get these enfeebled off. Yeah. Biggest bludgeoning reach is also only D8. So even putting aside it being the rune slot, it also requires you to use a weaker weapon. So I'm not a fan of Crushing for this party comp. On average, Crushing is very good. It just doesn't do what we need it to do to have a spot in this composition. And so this is our one damage dealing character. Let's focus on damage a little bit. So for level 2, we are going to not focus on damage. We are going to be taking Combat Assessment as our class feat, and additional lore, which lets us recall knowledge using int against undead at even a bonus above if we are using religion. And Combat Assessment basically just lets us strike, and if we hit, we get to recall knowledge. Easy enough. It can only be used on once per target per day, but it's still a way to cheat out a recall knowledge, which can be very powerful for learning which save is lower, fort or reflex, so that all of your grapplers get to know which set of stuff they should do, whether that's go for grapples first, go for trips first, go for combat grabs, etc., etc. Gives them a lot of information to play with. The spellcasters have more info to go with what spells to use. You can ask questions about if they have regeneration. It basically cheats out an extra action for every fight, which is exactly why we thought Sudden Charge was so good. So it basically is another way to cheat an extra action in a fight, which, pretty good. And then to answer your questions of why are we not doing another feat? Intimidating Strike is the classic for polearm fighters. But again, this is applying a status penalty that can't even be extended by the Resentment Witch. So I'd probably rather basic strike twice and cast shield in most scenarios. Because of, again, we are having a champion that is going to apply the Enfeebled, that is going to apply a Stupefied. We are going to have the Witch to apply a status penalty, everything else with Evil Eye. We are going to be fine. The Frightened will not give us too much other than like a -1 to AC. And I don't think that's good enough to sacrifice a main action on our damage dealer. Again, in a normal party, probably the best level 2 fighter feat. This is not a normal party. Everybody else is debuffing so hard, we don't need to worry about it. And then the question becomes, why not United Assault? Because like, the Resentment Witch might throw out some damage, and you have 3 party members. This is basically +3 damage for 1 strike per turn. Yeah, that's pretty good. But it still will not apply to something like Reactive Strike. And I think that in the very early game, you're going to have enough damage to just brute force stuff without this, because of a funny spell called Runic Weapon that will just make your D10 go to 2d10 for a fight. And that's just going to kill people a lot of the time. So I don't think United Assault is actually that good for this build specifically, but is probably the closest to Combat Assessment in terms of evaluation. It's pretty very close between the two feats, which one you want more. You go with either and be happy. I went with Combat Assessment because I think it's cooler to have the recall knowledge. Makes you more able to do interesting things against constructs, because then you could ask, hey, is there a specific damage type we should go for? Should we go for the electricity? I think it has more utility overall, and I'm going to evaluate that slightly higher, as well as not being uncommon. That's what it comes down to. And so, down at level 3, I'm going to say move crafting up to expert, because we aren't doing anything that requires athletics. So let's get crafting up so that we can repair shields better, and take fleet as a general feat. Because fleet is just bonus move speed, and bonus move speed is bonus move speed. It's good. And get some crafting items, just that way you can repair shields better. I know that there is like a crafter's eyepiece or something like that that actually increases the amount you can repair off a successful repair. And I don't think I need to explain more. At level 4, we are going to be taking a Magus feat to just get more cantrips, because cantrips are good. And that's our main form of like range attacking and elemental damage in the party. So I think that having more elemental damage for weirder fights is important for us. And then for skill feat, we are taking quick repair, because this is when our medicine is speeding up. We have a lot of focus spell healing, so the party is going to be resting for shorter times between combats. Quick repair lets you make sure the shields are fine, even in those shorter time periods. And then here is like some example spells I would take. Ignition is something I want to make sure is in your books. That way when you get spell strike, it's also fire. This will be the party's only real consistent source of fire damage, which is like a major thing you need to figure out, because some enemies have a weakness to fire and you want to be able to hit that, stop regeneration, etc. Caustic Blast can work better than Ignition in that slot, if you want to still have elemental damage, and it's a saving throw, so it'll always do some blah 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 blah. There are many options. I just want to make sure you have Ignition in your book. Caustic Blast is then like another choice. And why not use Slam Down? And I can give a very easy reason for this. We have 2 other characters that are maxing athletics to try and knock people prone. We do not need to make that 3. Moving on. Why are we not taking Swipe? Aren't we scared of a bunch of mooks? And well, yeah, kinda. It's pretty rare to have 2 enemies stand directly adjacent to each other within your reach, so you're usually needing to fish for this pretty heavily. And it isn't even that consistent in encounters with a lot of foes. So I'm putting it a little bit lower on terms of my evaluation. I'd much rather have the ability to attack someone that's 60 feet away and threaten them to make them come over to me and eat my reactive strike than try and run up to 2 enemies that happen to be standing close to swipe. So it's personal preference. You can absolutely take swipe. Quick reversal, same type of idea. If you are being flanked, I think that means there's a lot of small foes in that encounter, and you're probably killing one of them that's flanking you on your first strike of the turn to get the press trait active, because like fighter damage be that way. So I'm not too high on quick reversal. I think it's very good. I'm just unconvinced that it would happen super consistently. And if I'm taking a feat that's not being super consistent, I want to make sure it's covering up a weakness in a way that is very good for me. And I think having more cantrips covers up a more notable weakness, which is I can't play the game from range. There are some enemies with regeneration the party cannot deal with. And I think covering those matters more than getting a bit more damage in the group fight scenarios. I think that makes sense. And so we go into level 5. We're just going to take another cantrip from the Ancestry feats because, ooh boy, we love cantrips here. And note, this cantrip here will be based off our charisma, so we are going to be moving shield into that cantrip slot and then prepping another damage spell inside our main cantrip list. Easy enough. Weapon mastery group of polearm, because again, I wanted to use a halberd. You can have this be a flail if you wanted to use a flail. I just think some big reach weapon. And train survival from the increased int. Here's the ability boost I choose to use. Very simple. And then for spells, this is what it kind of looks like. And throw shield into the charisma-based innate spells. Easy. And so at level 6, this is our big damage dealing feat, and also a point against why I didn't want to take a big multi-pull attack thing on the previous level. And it's because Advantageous Assault is also a press trait ability. You'll see what it does later. And I'm also taking Magical Crafting here, I think the craft activity is generally pretty weak, but level 6 is when you're going to start outscaling a lot of settlements in an early game type society. So being able to generate your own magic items during downtime can be pretty useful starting in the mid to late game. And also, it's really cool, so we are picking it. If you don't really value that ability very much, you can go ahead and take another additional lore in some creature faction that would normally only be recall knowledge with wisdom. So like fiends, demons, fae, something along those lines. And then I'm saying boost Arcana as your skill bonus because the fighter is a major recall knowledge source of the party. So advantageous assault, as you can read above you, it is pressed, so it can only be used when you have an active multi-attack penalty. But if you're making a strike against a creature that is grabbed, prone, or restrained, which in this party is every opponent basically, you gain a bonus to damage on the strike equal to the number of weapon damage dice, or that number +2 if we are holding the weapon in 2 hands. And also on a failure, we get to deal that bonus damage regardless. So now we have very consistent damage output as a fighter. And we're just going to be hitting people with bonus damage. It's just going to be a good time. It's just straight bonus damage because this condition is automatically met for us. So this is a great damage per round fighter feat to make sure we get those bosses actually dead eventually. That's kind of all I have to say about it. So at level 7, I think crafting going to master is very important because this means that for quick repair, it only takes 1 minute to repair. It was 1 minute to repair any item before. Now it's 3 actions. So it takes you 6 seconds to make a repair check on an item. You can repair both shields 5 times each in 1 minute. That's good, to say the least. So now if you're out of combat, all of your repairs are basically going to be instant. As soon as combat ends, you just take everybody's shields, bump, up, 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 up. They're all full health. Easy. And toughness, because more HP is good HP. For level 8, I think take Spell Striker. And the reason I want to take Spell Striker, despite it only being once per day, is that, well, quite frankly, it's good burst damage at high accuracy. So if there are a bunch of low health guys around, you want to make sure one of them goes down. You throw a fighter accuracy spell strike directly to the dome, they explode. You can use Ignition for this, which is the fire damage cantrip that you'd want to carry around for if there's a creature with regeneration that gets disabled by fire. And some people may say, well, Ignition's only D4s, isn't that pretty weak? And well, Ignition does say in its text that it can be D6 if you're using it to make a melee spell attack. You're not technically using it for a melee spell attack because you're using it to fuel a spell strike, but many GMs will let you do the D6s of fire damage anyway. That's a common table ruling. It's not like super official, but I allow the fire D6s at my table. Mileage may vary. You can always take a Gouging Claw if that is something you are concerned about. And so here's the full text of Spell Strike. You can pause, read that up above. Basically, you just cast an attack roll spell, you put it on a strike, do strike damage plus spell damage. Pretty solid. And then here's what you'd do for level 9. For the skill increase, I say Arcana, just because common recall knowledge. You could pick Society instead, blah, blah, blah. But it's whatever you want to do. In terms of Resounding Bravery and the combat flexibility feat, this is something you can swap around daily. So try a bunch of stuff out, pick your favorite. I like Resounding Bravery because I value passives quite a bit, because we are frequently going to want to be striking, doing cantrips, shield, etc. So we aren't really going to have a lot of active actions that are free. So taking something that passively just happens is very good for us. Otherworldly Acumen lets us get some free spells. And, yeah. I decided to take Arcane stuff. Here are some feats I'd recommend picking from your fighter stuff. Sudden Leap lets you threaten stuff in the air, even with your melee strike, so, yeah. From your free spells, I recommend taking Enlarge as one of them, because if an enemy starts far away from you and needs to approach, you can enlarge yourself, get a 15-foot reach, and really, really make them have a bad day with reactive strikes. It also increases your damage a little bit, but you're mostly going to try and self-cast it to get more reach when you're very early in a fight. Another option would be Loose Times Arrow, just to make your entire party quicken for a round, which is probably better, if I'm being honest. But I think Enlarge is funnier, so I'd take Enlarge. And that's something all you can go home with, but it's funnier. Very good lesson. Yeah, in terms of the first rank spell, I didn't even put it in here, but Sure Strike is just like a pick if you want to have a first rank spell. That's another option. But I tend to be a little bit lower evaluating Sure Strike than most, even though we have Spell Strike, we have stuff to work with it. And that's for a very simple reason. Hero points exist. If you don't like missing your Spell Strike, hero point it. Like, you can build around hero points existing, they exist, so like, I don't know, use them. So at level 10, we're going to be taking Tactical Reflexes and Recognize Spell. So Tactical Reflexes simply says, get a second reaction for reactive strikes. So now when the crowd of minions starts to try and surround you, you get to swat 2 of them down at full fighter accuracy with fighter damage. Pretty strong. And you're also going to take Recognize Spell. Now, taking Recognize Spell this late on a class that already has a good reaction would seem very strange. If it seems strange to you, good job, you're thinking well. This is for a combo with Witch that we will see much, much later. And also, in terms of itemization for this build, get a Phantasmal Doorknob. It lets you make people dazzled when you crit. And if you watch some of my previous videos, particularly the one about, like, DPR, you'll know that I liken Dazzled to about a -2 to a target's accuracy. And this Dazzled can stick around with all the other conditions we have been applying. So then you don't even need to rely on resources to apply the Dazzled. So the hard lock on bosses just got that much harder. And also, eventually it becomes blinded at higher item levels. So you can just permanently blind a boss for an entire boss fight off of 1 lucky crit. Because you just need 1 lucky die crit off a fighter accuracy to blind the boss that will then get extended by Resentment Witch to last the whole fight. Yeah, this is... You can just straight up win a boss fight by critting once on a fighter. That's what this party does to you. And against... So, if you are allowed to have Phantasmal Doorknob, against, like, bosses, this party cannot lose. You just simply have the sustain, have the healing, debuff the boss, eventually you get the blinded off, and then they can't play the game, and you just kick them on the ground. That's it. That's the game. Like, I don't even have a joke here, it's just good. So you're only scared of, like, small minions, but are you really scared of small minions? Just punt them. You know, they're football shaped. Just like the toddlers, you know? Climb through a window. So yeah, also other later game items for this fighter. I'd recommend getting an Astral Rune in terms of your first, like, big damage rune, because you cannot grapple intangible creatures. So getting something that is Ghost Touch plus extra damage to everything that's alive is really good. Another option would be Flaming Rune if you want to go with stuff that is not Ignition. Which, we've heard a lot about it throughout all the other builds of, ooh, we're going to extend all the debuffs from the familiar ability, but what else is it doing? Because if it's just a debuff extender, well, that's actually enough to be worth a character slot, but, like, it can do more, you know? It's technically more of a character, because you're still a full caster. That's going to make you good, at least. So, onto the ABCs. Ancient Elf, where we're going to actually pick up Psychic, because we still have a little bit of a burst damage weakness. So, I think grabbing Psychic is actually a pretty good choice here. And then we're going to grab a Nimble Elf from the Ancestry feat. And Psychic will be Tangible Dream, use Int for spells to have it match up with the Witch intelligence. And select Shield as your unique cantrip. Now you can put the Shield spell on your allies and shield block for them. So if somebody is starting to get beat up, you can put the Shield cantrip on them, and suddenly they have that bit of extra HP because you can shield block for them. You don't have another reaction. This is going to be pretty good. And background is, of course, again, personal choice. I went with Hermit. Criminal is also a good one. It's just anything that gives you a useful skill feat type deal. And then go with Resentment Witch, because we kind of built the entire party around it at this point. If you didn't expect we were going Resentment, rewind the video. I could use the watch time. And so here is the amped shield cantrip. I'm going to just move my webcam way down here. Haha, you can only see my eyes now. Subscribe. So you can see this, the witch or the psychic variant of this spell up here is just going to be giving people AC. You can shield block with it, shield hardness. Your shield spell can be deployed on behalf of others. When you cast shield, you can choose a target ally within 30 feet to gain the benefits of the spell instead of you. Blah, 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 blah. You still are the one shield blocking. And then you can even use a focus point. This gives you an additional focus point, by the way. To then let the shield just block with more layers. And can cast shield even when it's on cooldown, stuff like that. It's another defensive option for you. And this class, as a 6 HP per level caster, kind of wants some defensive options. Now you do have a champion and a cleric in this party to make sure you don't die, but, you know, it's still nice to have another defensive option. And so here's my recommended spells for low levels. This is very damage focused, but you can swap these out with utility wherever you kind of want it. And so let's kind of go over the major ones. In terms of your slotted spells, I think that when you are at these lower levels, prepping anything other than Runic Weapon or Soothe in this party is a mistake. Runic Weapon is just the most efficient damage dealing ability in the entire game. It only works at levels 1 to when your fighter gets striking, but it is super good for that duration. And Soothe is just your healing spell, and that's kind of it. That's all we're caring about. Then in terms of the cantrips, we have stuff like Haunting Him, which is a cone cantrip. So if there are a bunch of enemies in front of you, cone, Haunting Him, deal a good amount of damage. It's area effect. The damage isn't horrible. You could think of it as like 1d4 per spell rank-ish, but it starts at d8, so it's pretty not bad. That's all I have to say about it. It's not bad. If there are a bunch of low health enemies, you can kind of walk up, Haunting Him, do a good amount of damage. Needle darts for having a 60-foot range, big deal. Pretty high base damage in 3d4. And this is basically your primary, oh, I'm super far away and I still want to it's just your generic option. And Void Warp, shorter range, but it is a saving throw cantrip, which means it'll always do some amount of damage. That's kind of all I have to say about this one. Occult List has pretty weak damage cantrips overall. There are some other good spells that aren't damage oriented though. Feel free to experiment based on what you want for your party. Casters in general for this party have a lot of room to mess with their spells, because all your major debuffs are coming from the champion's class features. So you don't actually need to force yourself into specific synergistic spells. Early game, just the power level of Runic Weapon is so high, and having healing is so strong, that's really hard to argue for any other spell. But once you start getting to those mid to high levels, you have a lot of room for experimentation that you might not realize. So I highly encourage you to get weird with your spell choice. And if you don't like something, just simply don't prep it the next day. All the casters in this party are prepared. And so here's like the array of starting options. I have all the dexterity skills, trained in athletics that you don't get stopped by climbing wall. The only character I've pointed out athletics as being trained because it wouldn't make sense normally. but that's why. And then just a bunch of the recall knowledge skills plus the dexterity skills. All stuff that should make sense to you upon reading it here. Moving on. So at level 2, I'm taking Catfall as the skill feat. It's personal preference, additional lore can fit, whatever you want to do. And then I'm also taking Basic Lesson for Lesson of Life, which gives us the life boost Hex. Because you get to have Resentment do its thing whenever you cast or sustain a Hex. This is a great Hex to cast, because we don't really need Evil Eye to be sustained and continually get value. So you can just kind of slap a life boost on something. It's like your Cleric or your Familiar takes some damage, they're getting life boosted, they will heal up over time, rely on champion reaction to mitigate incoming damage, move them to a safer position afterward. Whatever you need to do, this is just a one action thing that will heal somebody over time. And you may think, well, its burst healing is only like effectively 2 per spell rank. Is that actually good enough? And I say, yeah, 2 HP per spell rank is actually pretty good. That's like 2 rounds of this ticking, you go up like a die tier in terms of how much effective HP you have in a fight. And this is a focus spell, so it's an encounter ability. You can put a life boost on one character, round 2 put a life boost on a second character, round 3 life boost on a third character, and have it all be ticking. Because you remember how I pointed out that the shield spell from Psychic gave a focus point? Which also kind of gets a focus spell at level 1, which doesn't do a whole lot, but is a focus spell. So you have 3 castings of life boost at level 2. That is value. And life boost can also bolster your out of combat healing, because if you let it tick all the way down, because in a boss fight you are slowing them down so much, and you might be able to fully tick a life boost within a combat, it is 8 HP per spell rank. This is on efficiency level with 1 action heal, which is a melee only ability. The downside is, of course, this lasts 4 rounds, but also is like a thing that has your Hex, has your Familiar do its thing. I think it's a pretty strong ability, because you're not really going to get that much value out of Evil Eye. And you can only cast 1 Hex a turn, which will be an issue, but there is no language about you can't have multiple hexes active at the same time. It's just that you need to have it out there and maintain, sustain it, track it, whatever. I just think that life boost in terms of like keeping people topped up or getting the Cleric off the ground so that they can heal themselves, very important. At level 3, bring Stealth up to Expert because there are some Expert Stealth skill feats we want to spec into, and grab Toughness. That's right, we're not grabbing Fleet at level 3. We are a 6 HP per level caster that is also an elf. Our HP really low, we need to do something about that, or we're gonna die sometime. So Toughness. At level 4, we're gonna grab Reach Spell, because the enemies have cooties, and we have a low fort save. Gonna put it that way. Reach Spell will also combo with a Psychic ability we are going to get at level 6. Those of you that are tracking, oh, we are Intangible Dream, know what's coming at level 6 now. And we're also taking the skill feat Quiet Allies. So Quiet Allies, what it does is it's just going to let the entire party make a stealth check together with the Follow the Expert stuff, so we're going to get to add level to that check, and it'll be fine. It's not going to be a great stealth check, but you will have a stealth check you could make for the party. This says the entire group rolls for stealth. And you are included in your group, so I don't know if Assurance would technically work with this. I think it shouldn't, so I'm not going to say it works, but it might, based on complete rules written. I'm not going to think about it too hard. It doesn't feel like it should work, so it doesn't work. That's how I'm going to think of it. And then Reach Spell, it's 1 action, extend the range of any of your spells by 30 feet. Very simple. It's just a nice ability to have, because a lot of the occult list is closer range, 30 or 60 feet most of the time. So the ability to go a bit beyond that is very helpful for even the spells that aren't the one we're taking at 6. And so at level 5, we're going to be just like increasing Thievery, because that way you can disable traps, do all that kind of thing. Generally, I say Thievery isn't great, but we kind of don't really need a whole lot of skills from the Witch because the Fighter is kind of covering a lot of the int stuff. It's really personal preference what you want to have the second skill increases all be devoted to. I'd say Thievery, Society, and Occultism are all very strong options. I'm just kind of going with Thievery because I think that it makes sense for disabling certain types of hazards, because again, I'm trying to just like think of what is every possible thing that can get in this party's way. Hazards are a big one. A lot of hazards get disrupted by Thievery. That's kind of where the logic is. And so level 6, we're taking Psi Development, and a thing that lets us track people inside settlements easier. But the important thing is Psi Development, which is Psychic Dedication, and will give us Imaginary Weapon. And so Imaginary Weapon, baseline, is a melee range only cantrip that for 2 actions deals 48 bludgeoning or slashing, your choice. And on a crit, you can deal double damage and push the target 10 feet away. Cool enough. And we can spend 1 more action with Reach Spell to make this go further away and bop something on the head. That is all of our actions, and we don't have Cackle, and we're not going to be taking Cackle because we are so strict for class feats. So this will mean we are not sustaining the stuff against bosses. But you shouldn't be using the Imaginary Weapon into bosses. This is a burst damage tool for getting rid of minions before like stuff gets fully set up. And it's just a way for you to kill enemies before they become issues. If you're not able to kill enemies quickly in whatever fight you're in, you dig in for the long haul and you just keep on setting up your healing with your focus points and have your familiar be constantly chattering about how many debuffs the enemy has. The big thing that you note about Imaginary Weapon, though, is its amp. Its amp lets you make 2 of these strikes, and by the way, those strikes are also going to be basically double damage, because you are going to be heightening by 2d8 per spell rank. So, that's good. This will be doing a lot of damage, and I'm showing the version of this that you'd find at level 6, which has a decent to hit, not a good one, but like it's playable. And it's dealing 68 damage to 2 targets. And these are both full accuracy attacks, so this is a good ability. Psychics do not naturally have Reach Spell. This is a thing you can only do while multiclassing one way or another. So, yeah, this is just a really nice ability to have, and is our main way of dealing with on-level-ish foes, is by throwing the Imaginary Weapon at them, having the fighter finish them off, and when there are few enough enemies on board, it's inevitable that the party wins. Just use your focus spell healing. So level 7, Master Stealth, because there are some pretty good Master Stealth skill feats, and take Fleet, because move speed is good. I don't need to explain that further. At level 8, Swift Sneak, just be able to sneak at faster speed, and Spirit Familiar gives us another healing ability that is once per encounter, because we clearly do not have enough ways to deal damage to enemies and heal ourselves. Oh, by the way, this here is a will save. Will saves are decreased when an enemy is stupefied. The champion can apply stupefied, and we can extend the duration of that stupefied so they're both stupefied and enfeebled. So all will save abilities are actually like +2 accuracy effectively, compared to what they normally would be. Something to consider. Yeah. Also, this here of the champion is able to apply stupefied means that there's anti-synergy with Bon Mo, which is why we didn't have Bon Mo on the champion. I forgot to mention that section. I'll put it on screen when I mention the champion reaction if I remember. So at level 9, I decided to bring Thievery up to Master and take Elf Step because this helps you work around enemy reactive strikes. Just helps you get away from things, which is important for this build. And other stuff that just makes sense. Elf Step lets you just step twice. Now we are at level 10, where we are actually going to take a Psychic feat instead of Cackle. You could take Cackle instead, which just lets you sustain your hex or whatever. But we are taking Basic Thought Form instead. Quick Unlock is just a Thievery skill feat, doesn't really matter. Here are the ability boosts. Again, it's pretty standard. And I decided train survival just because there weren't that many great skills left. But Counterthought says, if a creature casts a spell with the mental trait, you can go ahead and try to counter it. But how do you know if the spell has a mental trait? You don't have it identified. Well, about 30 slides ago, the fighter gained Recognized Spell once they hit level 10, and we are getting Counterthought at exactly level 10. So the fighter is able to use their reaction to recognize a spell, and then the witch can then know, ooh, do I want to counter this with Soothe, which is a mental spell? Do I want to use my Synesthesia slot to counter this, which is a mental spell? Because you are going to have high rank mental spells, and you can use this to nullify opposing actions. Another thing to note with Counterthought and Counterspell, they don't state an effective range. So you can argue about what the range is supposed to be. I personally think the range should be about 60 feet, because that's kind of the range of a lot of abilities. Should probably be 60 or 30, but no range is listed, so your guess is as good as mine. I figured it'd be important for me to just have a small section here about familiar abilities. I didn't put too much thought into it. I mostly picked stuff that would be good passively, because we really want the familiar to stay alive and stay safe, so that way it can just be outside of the enemy's reach, just at that exact 15 feet mark, near the champion, so that way you can keep on extending debuffs and be protected. So I'm giving it independent, so that way it can move to that position easier, and you can get to that spot. I give it tough, so that way it is less likely to just pop if hit hard. I gave it familiar focus, so that way if you need to, you can use it to get back a focus point to then use it for healing, do whatever with it. And spell battery, because getting more spells of even the lower ranks can be very useful for this character, because your lower rank spells can still be stuff that like applies dazzled, can do a little bit of healing. A lot of good stuff can be from there. And there's stuff like spell delivery, which can be used to do your imaginary weapon, but specifies one target. Like, there are a lot of familiar abilities, and you can swap them out. So, play around with it. Tell me what you think feels good. This is kind of the setup that I'd run with, just for the sake of starting somewhere. But depending on what I feel like I need, I then get a stronger opinion on what I should have for the next day. So this is a spot where definitely experiment with it a little bit. And also, Shadow Signet is actually good for this build. I normally poo-poo on Shadow Signet because I say that if you're using attack roll spells in a high-level Pathfinder game, something has probably gone very wrong. But we are planning to use Imaginary Weapon. Imaginary Weapon is a very good spell that happens to be an attack roll spell. So Shadow Signet, letting that target any of their defenses, is pretty damn good. You don't get to target Will DC, sadly, because then it would combo with the Stupefied, but those are still some pretty good defenses to target. If you think the enemy has a lower reflex than AC because they're like a heavily armored character, you can target the reflex. That's kind of all I have to say about this one. It's probably worth the pickup, just that you can better bully lower health enemies. And for spells at the upper levels, I'd recommend replacing your lower rank slots with stuff like Kinetic Ram, which just basically is a get off me button. It's not going to do a lot of damage, it's not meant to do a lot of damage. It's just an action to try and get somebody off of you. Or stuff like Command, where you can try and help your allies knock somebody prone by doing something that is will-based. Blast, which if the fight does happen to be around you, or you want to get into melee and start slashing out with the runic weapons under the champion's protection, because they're going to have all of their shield block for allies, champion reaction for the ally to keep you alive, so you can do heavy melee damage, and provide accuracy buffs for not just you, but the whole team. Bless is a first rank spell that enables that. Albatross Curse is a circumstance bonus to attacks against the target, and is available to occult casters from the new Howl of the Wild book. Actually pretty damn good in this party, because enemies aren't really going to want to hit the bird, because then they have to roll get majorly penalized for the next will save and lose an action. And because they're getting majorly penalized on their next will save, you're gonna then just cast a big will save spell on them and they're not gonna have a good day. Laughing Fit, just so you can disable enemy reactions. Fight a Hydra. That Hydra is no longer biting like wild. If you're fighting a horde of Hydras, that's going to be an issue because we don't have something that can cauterize a bunch of heads at once. Except for the fighter's Caustic Blast, because I even planned around the Swarm of Hydra fight. That's right. Yeah, stuff like Laughing Fit to shut down enemies with problematic reactions. Very important. I'd say prep one of these. Revealing Light can just apply Dazzle to a group of enemies to make them have less damage. Give you more time to just apply your big focus spell, blap, blap, blap. It also can be extended with your witch stuff. And Main Distort is just like an area damage. 10-foot burst isn't big, but it is damage with an area and a reflex save, which is pretty rare for a party without a primal or arcane caster. So it has value just from that. This is probably going to be a go-to area damage spell for you, which is kind of sad to say, but occult casters are not famous for having area damage, but you have to make do with what you have. Inner Radiance Torrent is, I know, something that somebody was just writing a comment about, and if that was you, delete it now, or edit it to say that you got. And so Inner Radiance Torrent is actually on the errata list. I'm going to... I don't know how to disable my webcam. I'm just going to move it off screen. So Inner Radiance Torrent has a lot of words on it. The thing people are concerned about is hiding +1 to double the effective damage. So it does a lot of damage at the higher spell ranks when it probably shouldn't. So we know it's slayed for errata, but it's been slayed for errata for a few years. The community errata has basically decided that changes the hiding to a +2, fixes all the issues with it. So I think it's still a good spell at hiding +2. It is PFS restricted due to those balance concerns. Just something to note. Noise Blast, another just area damage thing. It can possibly deafen enemies. And you can again extend the duration of this deafen condition because Resentment Witch means that you aren't a good person, so it gives a condition, extend it, it's funny. Slow, of course, because what's funnier than a boss having 3 actions around, a boss having 2 actions around? And also, once you start getting to very high levels and you can cast Hide into Slow, this basically auto-wins fights against multiple enemies because they're not likely to be succeeding. So you just eat the entire enemy side's actions and you just mow through them after that. And just keep on prepping higher rank Soothes, because Soothe just gets multiplicatively better every spell rank, because you're getting that 1d10 plus 8 every spell rank, basically. Or that 1d10 plus 4, rather. Yeah. Soothe is a good spell. I misspoke there, it is a d10 plus 4, you can see here. But it's not as good as Heal. It does get the job done, though, when the Cleric is on the ground, though. And that's really all it's there for. Then there's also spells like Tortoise in the Hare, which can apply Slowed to an enemy for a shorter duration, which is the entire fight because we are Resentment Witch, reminder. But it also can quicken an ally for a little bit, which is just slow but kind of better if you want to throw a 4th rank slot at it. And then another reason I was maxing Thievery is for Umbral Graft, which lets you steal people's spell slots by just yoinking. Steal the slot. It's funny. It's more funny than good, but like it's so funny I'm gonna take it and point out as like a funny, good option. And Magic Mailbox, because you can do some nonsense with this spell and make basically entire information networks if you're willing to sacrifice enough slots for it. There is a reason this spell is uncommon, and that is because of people like me. I am proud of my life decisions. And then you have Synthestasia, which has not been brought back in Remaster, but is so powerful I can't leave it off this list. It has a bunch of text here, all of which is very, very powerful, but the part I'm going to focus in on is Clumsy 3. Clumsy 3 is -3 to AC. This is a death sentence if your party has a fighter in it, which ours does, of course. They're also going to be prone. Oh look, the fighter suddenly has +5 to hit, give them a bless, give them an albatross curse. The fighter has a +7 before the fighter accuracy, so they're actually at basically a +9 compared to everybody else normally in the game. Suddenly, 1 round is the entire combat. But that doesn't mean we can't extend the duration of that clumsy. We are Resentment Witch. So this spell, if your GM is allowing it, is completely absurd. And you should use it. Heavily. Use it a lot. It should be your main 5th rank slot. It is also mental, so it can be sacrificed in order to try and counterthought things. And then there's Wave of Despair, which is another area effect ability. It's pretty good. Applies slowed. Even on a success, they get to be slowed for a bit. And it also can disable reactions for a little bit. It's nice. I'm not going to say it's the best spell in the game, but it's pretty nice. And I'm going to mention Sure Strike isn't that good for this build specifically, because while we are using an attack roll spell often, we're frequently going to want to combine that with moving into melee range, a focus point, or a move out of melee range. Or a reach spell or moving out of melee range. So we aren't really going to have 3 actions where we are in somebody's face and are happy about it. So therefore, Sure Strike really isn't that good for us. It might be good if you can constantly find space to do the Sure Strike, do the big damage option. But I think if you're consistently finding that place where you have that space to do so, I don't think Sure Strike is the thing winning you that fight. I think it was whatever is giving you the space to where you can actually cast Sure Strike 2-action activity as a 6 HP per level caster. I'm just saying. I think that the Sure Strike is actually 2-action intensive at 1 because of how close range our spells abilities are, how action intensive those are. And it's only affecting 1 of the attack rolls from our amped focus spell thing, so bleh. And now I quickly want to do a segment of what would I do if I were to extend this party to 5 characters? And obviously you take a Guardian because you need more damage mitigation because we don't have that covered by Champion and Cleric and a Fighter that can self-cast Shield and a Witch that can cast Shield on things. And did I mention the Champion who's also protecting everybody with extra reactions? So anyway, we don't need a Guardian. So good 5th party members. We are going to let's set some requirements. They should have AoE because we are again talking about how we're kind of scared of all the small enemies because their abilities are going to get scarier as we level. And if there's a well-balanced group of enemy small guys, they could do a lot of action manipulation tricks against us and maybe give us a hard time. So probably some of AoE just to make that complete non-threat because that's the only thing that could even possibly threaten us anymore. Probably some kind of sustain, just in case both the Witch and the Champion get crit down while the Witch and the Cleric both get crit down while the Champion is out of focus points. That could be a lose condition. So make them crit down a 3rd creature, just because. And so I'd go with something like Kineticist of Wood/Water. The Wood/Water Kineticist also can get the Timber Sentinel because we are locking down movement like hell. So Timber Sentinel will also make us basically immortal in terms of damage mitigation and help out our area damage weakness, but meh. This is probably the strongest 5th party member if I'm being honest. We can also get a Primal or Arcane Sorcerer that splashes the Champion archetype to further punish people for being in melee and attacking anyone really, while having a lot of spells that can then burst a backline, or burst a bunch of small enemies down, or just really any druid because they all kind of do this kind of thing. These would all fit well. I would say that you can't really shrink down this party of 4 any further without majorly gaining a weakness, because if you drop the Cleric, you are no longer consistent at sustaining throughout a long adventuring day when you're getting crit and getting unlucky during that adventuring day. The Cleric is a lot of RNG mitigation because it doesn't need to really roll for healing a lot. It can help you in making sure you get a grapple off when you need it, help you make sure you get trip off when you need it. You can't get rid of the champion because that's your debuff spreader. You can't get rid of the witch because that's necessary to make sure the debuffs stick. And you can't really get rid of your consistent damage character or else fights don't end and you're wasting a bunch of resources to sustain. So you can't really trim down to 3 easily. You might be able to do it if you replace the champion with the sorcerer and you're starting at a higher level, but you're really not going to want to trim down to 3 characters. Trim down to 3 is just really hard. Going up to 5 gives you a lot more options and flexibility though. So, highly recommend one of these if you want to extend the party to 5 characters. Item upgrade order, because while I did build all these characters using automatic bonus progression, I do want to give suggestions of when to buy stuff. So early game, throw everything into getting heavy armors. And people might say, but don't you want the fighter to have accuracy? Well, I mean, yeah, but they already have it from runic weapons, so we don't need that yet. Then after you get the armor sets figured out, get the fighter to striking. Then everybody else can get their +1 runes. Because the only thing that matters is the fighter's damage. The champion's accuracy doesn't even matter as much as the fighter's damage until the champion gets combat grab. Because until then, you're just going to be grappling and tripping the entire time because you're getting expert athletics at level 2. So just funnel all the money into getting fighter striking like ASAP, because that then frees up your first rank slots on all your casters to be things that are not runic weapon. And then you're going to want to look at your lifting belts, probably even before striking runes on your other martials, because +1 to athletics is your trips and your grapples, which are very essential. And the fighters just can beat the hell out of the enemies anyway. Then get your strikings after the lifting belts, then get all your +1 armor runes after that. For the order of the armor runes, I would say get the champion, then the cleric, then the fighter, then the witch. The reason to get the champion first is so that way enemies are incentivized to hit anyone else, so that you can keep on getting your champion reaction off consistently. Then the cleric, because that will be their next target, because always hit the healer first, am I right? Then after that, get the fighter, because the fighter is also going to be in melee with people. Then the witch last, because I'm out of people to give armor before the witch. Then grab your doorknobs. You can probably grab your doorknob even before the +1 armor on the fighter, because the doorknob is that big of a deal. Being able to dazzle people is such a major tank bonus for the entire party that the doorknob is just such a powerful item. Then probably grab a bunch of utility scrolls for your casters. Stuff like your translates, your create waters, your disguises, whatever. Just a bunch of things that you might need one day. Keep that in a bag. And out of combat, if there's a scenario where, oh, how are we climbing up this 100-foot tall cliff? You just pull out your 3 scrolls of helpful steps and you just make a ladder that goes up 120 feet. Yeah, that's all you need to do. So just a bunch of utility scrolls at that point. And what makes a good utility scroll? A spell that you don't normally want to prep is really good out of combat. All of those, put them in a bag. And then freestyle from there. Get the Astral Rune, just kind of get whatever you want. This is kind of the order I'd buy items early game though. And I think this is kind of the essentials. We are at combat strategy. What do we actually do when playing these characters? So against boss fights, if they have low fortitude, grapple them. Then they will never be able to escape the grapple without being grappled again, because they're getting grappled by maybe 2 people. Get them on the ground with a trip, just at some point during this, and have the fighter beat them to death with hammers. Sound good? Yeah, should sound good. Against bosses, you're really just kind of like throwing out your debuffs, making sure that they can't play the game. And a lot of the low fort bosses are actually going to be skirmishers, snipers, or mages of some variety. Against snipers, if you can close the gap on them as this party, you have a fighter threatening a reactive strike on them. You have 2 grapplers stopping them from moving and stopping them from interacting to reload their weapon. Yeah, so they're not playing the game after you get into melee. They just die. The fight is over. It doesn't matter. They just lose. Against the spellcasters, because they're easy to talk about. Grappling gives a flat check for every manipulate action. Off the top of your head, name 3 spells that don't have the manipulate trait. I can get shield, true strike, sure strike aka. That's about it off the top of my head, so maybe you did better. You probably did, but you know, that's as much as I can think about because I've been recording for way too long. So yeah, spellcasters get neutered by the grapple happening. And if their spells concentrate, oh no, stupefied from the champion reaction. And that means there's another flat check going on. Because that's how it goes now. You're just simply not allowed to play the game. And that's it. That's the end of the story. And against skirmishers, the ones that like to weave in and out of melee range and do their thing, grappling stops them from moving. And the fighter threatening reactive strikes is also probably making them think twice about moving. So, overall, doing pretty well. I would say the skirmishers are better into you than you would think, because the enfeebled is less likely to hurt their accuracy because they tend to have dexterity accuracy attacks. Still, hit them with the evil eye, get them grabbed, they'll go down like the rest of them. Now against high fortitude enemies, you trip them. Because I can't think of an enemy that traditionally has both high fort and high reflex out of all the basic creature templates. And if they are on the ground, you can then combat grab them. And if you can combat grab them, they are grabbed forever. Because of Resentment Witch. And the boss can't exactly kill the familiar because it's protected by the champion, getting healed by the cleric, etc, etc, etc. So then you trip them on the ground, do all your stuff against bosses, and you beat them to death with hammers. There you go. That's how you beat bosses with this party. I was kind of mentioning a lot of the different tools every individual character would use throughout the video. If you are super far away from an enemy and they're sniping you down with a longbow, you run away, get cover, sneak in with the witch around a back way. Because that encounter is not meant to be won straightforward anyway. No party could beat that in a straightforward way. So you have a witch that has a lot of the subterfuge skills. Go subterfuge. So here's like the step list for what to do in the case of like bosses in terms of actual actions. Step 1, delay or cast spells with a long duration if the boss is not in melee with you yet. Otherwise, you might need to athletic rush in if they're a ranged enemy, try to get the grappler trip. And if the boss is walked up, you can then athletic rush just to get the bonus to make sure you get that grappler trip off when it's essential. And if you fail to get both halves of it, there's another athletic rush character ready to get that second half, and both you have enough tries at it to probably get both off round 1. If not, it takes a couple turns, whatever. The fighter walks up as well with sudden charge with all of its other stuff. Champion starts layering their debuffs. The casters can throw on the heals, debuffs, buffs, whatever they want to do as they want, depending on the situation. And then you win after however many turns it takes of the fighter hitting them while they can't play the game. Easy enough. And now boss plus a friend that is much lower level or equal level to the party. This is where the spell strike comes in. You pop the thing that's next to the boss. Now there's only one enemy, and you can use the witch amped imaginary weapon to deal some damage to both of them. And then it becomes a solo boss fight. Repeat the instructions on the previous slide. And what do you do if there's a bunch of minions? So you cast Divine Wrath from the Cleric, or you cast Sudden Blight from the Cleric, or you do a Noise Blast from the Witch, or you do a Revealing Light to make them all do less damage. Basically just throw out an area effect spell, and then let the fighter, let the champion, let the cleric, let the witch, let them all just kind of deal damage, reduce the enemy's numbers. That gives you inevitability, and then you just kind of stall in order to win, because you're just going to deal enough damage to the point where the enemies will start doing less and less damage, you don't have to put as much effort into stalling, and then you just kind of roll over them. So, this is the entire game plan. It's a much shorter game plan because fewer things can really truly go wrong. The only things that can go wrong against a bunch of mooks is if they have action denying abilities. Like if they have Spellcaster Mook 1, 2, 3 combined with Grappler Mooks. And they basically do what your party does to bosses, but to you. That's like the only time you could have a chance of losing. But if you prepped damage spells in that area of effect, it really shouldn't be too much of an issue for you. Against equal level enemies, it's all situational. If there's one that's closer to you, you just try and burst that one down and then like keep the rest off of them. Especially if they have like a healer, you focus the healer. Like, just play well and know that your goal as a party is to get more actions than the enemy side somehow, more threat power. And by threat power, I mean your level compared to the enemy's level. Translate that to an amount of XP. That is how much threat you're demonstrating by being alive and in a position where you can do your thing. So just keep your threat level high and try to do things with either debuffs or damaging enemies to get them out of the initiative order to make so that your side is demonstrating way more threat. Then you are inevitably going to win. Just use your resource to stall and let your damage just kind of get there in the end. That's all you really need to do as this specific party. And again, 750 likes, and I'll do a combat demo for all this. This was a really long video, so if you made it all the way to the end, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button so I actually do that combat demo. And with that, that's kind of all I have for this one. It was a long one. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I will not do this again. Unless I have a really, really good idea that requires an entire party to pull off. This was still a lot of work, and I'd probably just do that in like a shorter form next time, but for those of you that wanted a build guide that went over combos for an entire party, it has now been done. There's a reason people don't do this. Look at the runtime. It's so long. But anyway, that's all I have. Have a good one.